Have you ever felt like you've wasted a bunch of time learning some new triad shapes only to shortly forget them all and never actually use them again in your playing? As guitarists, we all hear about how important the triads are, and this might have actually inspired you to learn some new shapes for yourself. You might have even recognized some of these new shapes in songs that you've learned how to play, but if we're being honest, we don't really understand why those shapes are used in those songs and how to use them ourselves in our own improvised creations. So what are we supposed to do when we learn how to play all these triad shapes, all the inversions up and down the neck, but we find ourselves in a position where it hasn't really impacted our playing whatsoever? Well, today to fix this, we're going to look at what we're actually supposed to be doing with these triads and inversions once we've learned the shapes. So to get the most out of the triad shapes, we need to do two things. First, we need to have a basic understanding of the music theory behind the chords in your key. I'm sure many of us already know this, but that's basically just like the Nashville number system. Just knowing that you have like a 1 chord, 2 chord, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on and so on. Just knowing how the diatonic harmony works within a key signature. It's quite simple. The second thing we need to do is we need to rethink the way we play chords. Inside every single chord shape that we've learned on the instrument, there is actually a bunch of triads stacked on top of each other. So if we take this like bar chord shape over here, this major bar chord shape, we can actually see on the D, G and B strings, we actually have this root position triad right here as well. The exact same thing for the minor version of this bar chord. Right here on the D, G and B, we have a minor triad as well. And again, like the very first chord that most of us learn on the instrument, this C major chord, right? Really, really basic. We think of it as a chord shape and not a collection of triads. If we break down every single string we're playing, we can see we're actually playing triads. So again, on the middle D, G and B strings here, we have this triad. And again, on the A, D and G string, we have this root position triad. And again, on the G, B and high E, we have this triad over here. This means that all the chord shapes you've learned, even as a beginner, the very first couple of ones, every single open chord is actually just a collection of triads, roots, thirds and fifths stacked on top of each other. So with that in mind, we want to start thinking about these chord shapes as collections of triads and start using the individual pieces of triads rather than the whole full chunk of the chord shape. So now we can start to break down these triads into 3 strings at a time and look at how these shapes actually relate to the individual chords inside of our key signature. So again, if we were told to play the diatonic chords of G major, you might play them as bar chords like this, all the way up and down the neck and so on, right? Or you might even play them as open chords. Again, you're going to have to use a bar chord for this B minor, and so on all the way up and down the neck, right? And you might even like switch between like the E and the A string bar chord shapes, right? But we want to start thinking about playing these as triads across the neck in our diatonic key signature. So again, if we know that like this is hiding inside of that shape, we can play these as diatonic chords all the way up and down the neck as well. But again, all right, big deal. Why is that important? We also know that we can invert every single one of these chords, right? And that means that we can play the one chord starting from here and all its inversions up and down the neck too. And again, we also know that we can invert this one. I'm going to play this down here because I'm going to have more room so I don't run out of frets over here. But again, like 12 frets, the same as the open strings here. Again, if we know that this is also the one chord, we can play the triads and its inversions all the way up and down the neck as well from here. And so on and so on and so on. So when we take this information and apply it to our major scale and our diatonic chords inside of our major scale, we find ourselves with 3 different places to play each of the chords, each of the 7 chords inside of our key across the fretboard. So instead of being limited to certain spots and only playing these bar chord shapes, we actually have a lot more freedom to explore all the frets on the guitar now. So you might be thinking, okay, big deal, I get it. I can play these triads as chords and I can play them in different places across the neck. What am I supposed to do with this to impact and influence my playing? Well, let's say you're soloing over a specific chord, like just A minor for example, and like you're playing around this pentatonic box over here, and you want to build the solo up in pitch, you want to rise. What you can do, you can follow the guidelines of these triads until you find that same scale shape all the way up an octave. You can also use this information to pair two different triads from your diatonic key together to add in some more interesting harmony whilst climbing up your scale as well. So let's say again we're playing in like the key of G major and we're playing over this A minor chord in like an A Dorian type of setting. You can pair the A minor and B minor together and those inversions of each triad until you reach that kind of scale position all the way up the next octave on the fretboard as well. And again, there's even more that you can do with these triads as well when you figure out how they apply to the major scale. It's going to become a lot easier to learn your major scale shapes all the way across the neck when we see where the triads fit into them as well. Again, I know a lot of us kind of have some trouble with learning the major scale positions all the way across the fretboard. It's kind of a bit of a lazy habit that we have. We like playing the pentatonic scales, but we struggle a bit more with the major scales. When you can see where the triads line up with each other, it's going to make it easier to figure out what these scale shapes are. So let me show you what I mean by this, right? So let's say we're playing around the 5 chord in the key of G major. So that is G, A, B, C, D is the 5 chord, right? And if we know that we can turn that D major bar chord into a triad like this over here, this is how we're supposed to use it to figure out our major scale shapes a lot easier. So what we want to do, figure out the triad shape for the chord below. So that's going to be the 4 chord. We have this triad shape over here for C major. And the triad shape above, which is the 6 chord, which is going to be E minor. And we're going to use these kind of like shapes here, where these frets are, as kind of guidelines to add in little fills, or maybe even like little like solo parts, right? So, to add in a little fill, all you have to do is just hit those triad notes that are above or below. So let's say I'm playing over like D major like this, like. You can see where these notes line up for the next triad. Those are the notes, those are the options of the frets you have available to you to add in notes that are going to sound good over the chord. Like you're going to make sure that you're not going to hit a wrong note, like accidentally playing like and getting lost or whatever. It's the triad shapes above and below each chord act as a guideline for where your major scale is and the notes that you're allowed to play. So you can kind of get away with doing more of the Jimi Hendrix kind of type of playing when you can see and visualize where these kind of chord shapes exist all the way across the fretboard by using triads. So the reason this works is that notes that you're using to create triads are taken from the notes inside of your major scale. So like the notes that make up this 4 chord, the notes that make up this 5 chord, and the notes that make up this 6 chord, they're all inside of this G major scale. So this means that at every single point in the scale, when you're playing these scale shapes, at any note you land on, a triad can be made from them. The triads, they're hiding in plain sight. At every single point in your scale, a triad shape can be formed. So an analogy you can use to maybe understand this a bit easier is think about the notes inside of the major scale as kind of like cells of an organism. And then the triads inside the major scale is kind of like the organs of an organism. Now we know that like the cells combine together to make the organs, and then when the organs all function together, you get like a fully functioning human body. So now that we know that the triads are actually hiding in plain sight all the way over the fretboard, how can we use them to transform the music that we play? So when we start thinking about substituting the triads for just regular like bar chord shapes, right? We give ourselves the freedom to play all over the neck instead of just being locked into one place to play a chord progression. So let's look at the chords for Knocking on Heaven's Door. We have like G major, then D major, then A minor. And the second time round it's G, D, C. So before learning your triads, you might think about playing this chord progression only using the open chords or like the bar chords. But when we think about playing these as triads, one, we have the freedom to kind of add in some more fills and kind of do that Jimi Hendrix style of playing. And we also have the freedom to find out ways to play this chord progression in multiple places across the fretboard. So it kind of makes the guitar that we're playing, the parts that we play, a bit less boring to listen to. So let's look at how we can convert this chord progression into just triads and make it more interesting. So we can take this G major chord like this here, turn it into this triad. We can play D major like this over here, and then A minor like this. And again, I can do some kind of like Jimi Hendrix style stuff for this chord progression. I go like... So it gives you more freedom to kind of add in those fills. And again, the way that I visualize where those fills are, just look at your triad shapes and figure out where the next chord in your key signature for that triad shape exists above it, right? So for like G major, this one here, the second chord is going to be A minor. So again, I can kind of visualize those shapes there. For D major, I'm playing this second inversion. The next chord after D major is going to be E minor, and we can play that here like this. So when I can use like hammer offs and pull offs from this shape here. And again for like A minor, that's the second chord in our key. The next one above that's going to be B minor, and that shape looks like this. So I can use all of those notes kind of above it to add in fills over there. But again, there's more than just this kind of section of the fretboard as well. If we know that we can invert these chords and play them in different spots all the way over the neck, we're going to find different places to add in fills and play these chord progressions all over the neck. So I can take this like G major, move it over here. I can take this D major, move that over here. And I can take this A minor, move that over here. And again, I can do the same thing where I add fills. So I can go like... and I can find a different place to play this over the neck. And again, I can do this. If I invert this G major as well to here, I can now find another place to play this over the neck. So I have like G major over here. I have like a D major here, and like an A minor here. So I can go like, let's see what I can do. And again, you can find different ways to play these chords all the way across the neck. And again, once you get comfortable and confident with doing this, you can start to combine these triad shapes together and come up with a more kind of fluid sounding guitar part on the instrument. This is something that like John Mayer will do a lot when he's playing as well. So he'll combine these triads and inversions across the neck together. So you can play like G major by going like... you can move to the next triad. You can work your way all the way up and down and go and flow between all these different inversion shapes for each chords, add in different little fills in different places for each chord. And again, once you get really comfortable with doing this, the guitar is going to be a lot more expressive for you. It's going to kind of unlock the fretboard a lot more. We can even elaborate on this idea of using the triads to add some variation in our playing by looking at some classic riffs that use triads. I think probably the best example of a really good riff using just triads is Van Halen's Running with the Devil. Now Eddie's playing this part that goes something like, again, it's just using those major triad shapes. I'm pretty sure we all know how to do this stuff. But again, we can add some variation and keep the harmony the same, but find a different way to play this riff across the fretboard by looking at where these inversions line up, right? So if we know that we can take this chord and play the inversion like that over here, we can also do that for every single point of this riff. So we can go like, so that means this part can change into, right? And then this part here, that can go to, and that can go to, and then that can go to this. So we can go like, again, you can see how you can play this this riff all the way across the fretboard, keeping the harmony the same. But by using these triads and inversions, you're able to elaborate upon your ideas instead of just being stuck playing the same thing over and over. Now, this concept works for any song that uses triads as chords. Again, another really good example of a riff that only uses triads is John Mayer's Last Train Home. So again, if we know that every single part of this riff can be inverted, we can change this idea, the starting point here. We can move that here, and then next chord. So we can play the riff like this now. We can go like, and then we can start the riff from here. So you can see, you can use this as an example to add even more variation into your playing and use the whole of the fretboard. Keep working your way all the way up and down the neck. And again, you can also use these triads to improvise all the way across the fretboard too. Now, if you want to level up your playing and you're improvising even further, I recommend you check out this video that I've made for you over here on improvisation too. I think you're going to enjoy it. And again, you can also join my free school community. You'll get access to all the diagrams that we covered in today's video. And you also get access to a community of like-minded guitarists who are also trying to improve and in the same position as you.